My name is Sophia, and until recently, I believed I had the kind of life people dream about. At 26, I shared a cozy apartment with my boyfriend, Lucas. It wasn't a luxurious place, but it was warm, comfortable, and filled with little moments that made it feel like home. Every morning, sunlight poured through the large windows, filling every corner with soft golden light. I loved waking up to those peaceful mornings. I worked in a small office only a short walk from our apartment. My routine rarely changed. I left home early, enjoyed the quiet walk to work, spent the day with friendly coworkers, and returned home in the evening. The salary wasn't impressive, but it was enough for a simple, comfortable life. Lucas also had a steady job at an electronics store where he helped customers choose computers and accessories. He was patient, intelligent, and naturally friendly. People trusted him easily, and I was proud whenever someone praised his kindness. We had been together for 3 wonderful years. Our evenings were my favorite part of the day. We cooked dinner together, watched movies, laughed over silly jokes, and talked about everything, from future dreams to childhood memories. Those ordinary nights felt extraordinary because we shared them together. There was one more person who completed my small world. Her name was Chloe. We had been best friends since our school days. Over the years, our friendship became stronger than most family relationships. She knew every secret I had ever shared, and I knew hers. I trusted her completely. Chloe visited us several times every week. We'd make tea, sit around the kitchen table, and spend hours talking about work, relationships, and life. Lucas always welcomed her warmly, and the 3 of us often laughed together until late in the evening. Looking back now, those memories seem almost unreal. At the time, I believed I had everything I needed. A loving partner. A loyal best friend. A peaceful life. Every morning felt familiar. I woke up smiling, went to work, came home, prepared dinner with Lucas, watched television, and fell asleep believing tomorrow would be just as happy. For a long time, nothing seemed wrong. Then tiny changes quietly entered my life. They were so small that I almost ignored them. Lucas, who usually arrived home around 6 in the evening, began returning much later. Sometimes it was 7. Other nights it was almost 8. When I asked if something had happened, he simply smiled and blamed extra work at the store. "It has been busy lately," he would say. "My manager keeps asking me to stay longer." His explanation sounded reasonable. Why wouldn't I believe him? Trust had never been a problem between us. A few days later, I noticed something else. Lucas had become strangely attached to his phone. During dinner, while watching television, even while we were talking, his eyes constantly drifted toward the screen. Every few minutes another notification appeared, and a quiet smile crossed his face. Whenever I asked what was so interesting, he brushed it off. "Just work. Nothing important." One of the guys sent a funny message. I laughed with him, but a small voice inside me whispered that something felt different. Not wrong. Just different. As the weeks passed, our conversations slowly disappeared. The man who once couldn't wait to tell me about his day now answered every question with only a few words. How was work? Fine. Everything okay? Just tired. Sometimes he sat silently in front of the television without paying attention to anything on the screen. His body was beside me. His mind seemed somewhere else. I wanted to believe stress was the only reason. Everyone has difficult weeks. Everyone gets exhausted. That's what I kept telling myself. Still, an uncomfortable feeling settled deep inside my heart. It wasn't fear. It wasn't jealousy. It was uncertainty. One afternoon, while Chloe and I shared tea in the kitchen, I finally admitted how worried I had become. I don't know what's happening, I confessed quietly. Lucas has changed. She listened carefully without interrupting. After a short silence, she reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. You're thinking too much, as she said with a reassuring smile. Relationships go through phases. He's probably overwhelmed with work. But he barely talks to me anymore. He loves you, Sophia. Give him some time. Her words comforted me. She was my closest friend. If anyone understood us, it was Chloe. So I decided to stop worrying. I welcomed Lucas home with a smile every evening. I cooked his favorite meals. I avoided asking difficult questions. I convinced myself that patience would solve everything. But deep inside, something continued to whisper that my perfect life was slowly beginning to crack. Life continued to move forward, but it no longer felt the same. The apartment that had once been filled with laughter now seemed strangely quiet. Silence settled between Lucas and me like an invisible wall. Even when we sat together, it felt as though we were living in different worlds. I kept telling myself that relationships weren't perfect every single day. Maybe this was only a difficult chapter. Maybe everything would return to normal if I stayed patient. But patience didn't bring back the man I once knew. Lucas was home less and less. Whenever he arrived, he looked distracted. His phone rarely left his hand, and every notification seemed more important than the conversation we were trying to have. Sometimes I caught him smiling at messages. Other times he quickly locked the screen the moment I walked into the room. He never acted angry. He never started arguments. That almost made it worse. It was as if he had quietly drifted away while still living under the same roof. One evening, Chloe stopped by after work. As usual, she hugged me warmly and asked how things were going. I forced a smile. I'm trying not to overthink everything, I admitted. She nodded with confidence. You've always worried too much, as she laughed gently. Lucas cares about you. Stress changes people. Her reassurance sounded convincing. After all, she knew both of us better than almost anyone. I wanted to believe her. So I did. Days passed. Then one small moment changed everything. It happened while I was doing laundry on a quiet Saturday morning. As I picked up one of Lucas's shirts, a sweet fragrance caught my attention. It wasn't mine. I paused and smelled it again. Soft vanilla. Fresh flowers. The scent felt strangely familiar. Then it hit me. Only a day earlier, Chloe had excitedly shown me a new perfume she had just bought. She had even sprayed a little on her wrist so I could smell it. It was exactly the same fragrance. For a second, my heart skipped a beat. I stared at the shirt without moving. Then my mind immediately searched for a reasonable explanation. She hugs him when she visits, I whispered to myself. Of course some perfume could transfer. That made sense. Didn't it? Trying to calm my thoughts, I finished the laundry and pushed the feeling aside. But something had changed. Once suspicion enters your mind, it becomes impossible to ignore. After that day, I noticed details I had never paid attention to before. Lucas often stepped into another room whenever his phone rang. If I entered unexpectedly, the conversation usually ended within seconds. Sometimes he smiled at messages and immediately placed the phone face down on the table. Other times he carried it everywhere, even into the kitchen or bathroom. None of these things proved anything. Yet together they formed a picture I couldn't stop thinking about. The strangest part wasn't Lucas. It was what happened whenever Chloe came over. The quiet, distant man I had been living with suddenly became energetic again. He laughed. He joked. He seemed completely relaxed. Watching them together felt different. Their conversations flowed effortlessly. They shared inside jokes I didn't understand. Occasionally they exchanged quick glances that lasted only a second, but somehow those tiny moments made me feel invisible. I hated myself for noticing. I hated myself even more for wondering why. One evening they sat talking on the sofa while I prepared tea in the kitchen. From the next room I could hear them laughing. Not once did either of them call my name. For several minutes I simply stood there, holding 3 cups of tea, wondering why I suddenly felt like a guest inside my own home. That night I couldn't sleep. Questions circled endlessly through my mind. Was I imagining everything? Was work really exhausting Lucas? Or was my heart trying to warn me before my eyes were ready to see the truth? I still had no answers. Only growing doubt. And deep inside, I could feel that something much bigger was waiting just around the corner. No matter how hard I tried, the distance between Lucas and me kept growing. Every morning I woke up hoping things would improve, and every night I went to bed with the same heavy feeling in my chest. I missed the man who used to make me laugh over dinner. I missed our long conversations. Most of all, I missed the feeling of being loved. Instead of confronting him, I chose a different path. I believed our relationship deserved one more chance. One evening, while sitting alone after work, an idea came to me. What if we leave everything behind for a weekend? No phones. No work. No distractions. Just the two of us. Maybe all we needed was time together. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became. The next day I found a charming seaside hotel about 2 hours away. It wasn't expensive, but it looked peaceful. The rooms overlooked the ocean, and every review described it as the perfect place to relax. Without telling Lucas, I booked the room. For the first time in weeks, I felt excited. When he came home that evening, I greeted him with a smile. "I have a surprise," I said. He looked tired but curious. "What is it?" "I booked us a weekend by the sea." For a brief moment, his face lit up. "Really?" I nodded. I thought we could spend some time together. Just us. He smiled. "I'd like that." Those four words filled me with hope. For the next several days I planned everything carefully. I packed our bags. I searched for restaurants near the beach. I even imagined us walking along the shoreline at sunset, laughing like we used to. Maybe this trip would remind us why we had fallen in love. Maybe this was exactly what we needed. The morning of our trip finally arrived. I cleaned the apartment, packed the last few things, and wore my favorite dress. Lucas had promised he would finish work early and be home by 4 o'clock. At 3:30, I checked the clock again. Everything was ready. 4 o'clock came. Then 4:30. 5. The apartment remained silent. I picked up my phone several times, then put it back down. Finally, it rang. Lucas. The moment I saw his name on the screen, something inside me already knew. I answered quietly. "I'm so sorry," he began. His voice sounded rushed. "There was a problem at work. I can't leave today." I closed my eyes. "What kind of problem?" "My manager needs everyone to stay. We have to fix something before tomorrow." He paused. "We'll go next weekend. I promise." Next weekend. Those words felt painfully familiar. There was always another excuse. Another delay. Another promise. I forced myself to stay calm. "It's okay," I whispered. "We'll talk later." I ended the call before he could say anything else. The apartment suddenly felt enormous. The suitcase stood beside the door. The hotel confirmation still lay on the table. Everything I had planned collapsed within a single phone call. I sank onto the floor. This time, I didn't hold back the tears. I cried until there were no tears left. Not only because the trip had been cancelled, but because, deep inside, I was beginning to realize that I was the only one still fighting for us. When evening came, I made a decision. I needed space. I needed to clear my mind away from the apartment, away from the silence, away from the endless questions. I called my mother. "Can I come home for a few days?" She didn't ask why. She simply replied, "Of course. We'll be waiting." Hearing those words brought me more comfort than I expected. I packed a small travel bag before going to bed. Lucas returned home long after midnight. I pretended to be asleep. He quietly entered the bedroom, changed his clothes, and lay beside me. We were only inches apart. Yet it felt like we were separated by an entire lifetime. Before sunrise, I slipped out of bed without making a sound. Lucas was still sleeping peacefully. I looked at him one last time. Part of me wanted to wake him, to ask every question that had been haunting me. But another part was simply too tired. Without saying goodbye, I picked up my bag, locked the apartment behind me, and drove toward my parents' house. As the city disappeared in my rearview mirror, I expected to feel only sadness. Instead, alongside the pain, there was something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I didn't know it then. But before this day ended, my life was about to change forever. The road ahead was quiet. Soft morning light stretched across the empty highway as I drove toward my parents' home. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to silence the storm inside my mind. Every mile placed more distance between me and the apartment. Between me and Lucas. For the first time in weeks, I felt as though I could finally breathe. It was still sitting inside my bedroom closet. I sighed. "I can't leave it behind," I whispered. The gift meant too much. After a moment of hesitation, I turned the car around and started driving back. The closer I came to the apartment, the heavier my heart became. I couldn't explain why. Something deep inside me felt restless. When I finally parked outside the building, everything looked perfectly normal. The streets were quiet. The neighbors' windows were closed. Nothing seemed unusual. I unlocked the front door as quietly as possible, expecting the apartment to be empty. Lucas should have been at work. The hallway was dark. I stepped inside and gently closed the door behind me. Then I heard it. Soft music. It floated through the apartment like a whisper. I frowned. Lucas almost never played music in the morning. For a moment I thought maybe the television had been left on. Still holding my keys, I slowly walked toward the living room. Each step felt strangely heavy. The music grew louder. Then I heard laughter. Very quiet. Very close. My heartbeat became faster. I reached the corner of the hallway and looked toward the living room. At first I only saw the back of the sofa. Then I noticed two people sitting close together. Closer than friends ever should. One of them shifted slightly. The sunlight touched his face. It was Lucas. A cold wave rushed through my body. Before my mind could process what I was seeing, the woman beside him turned her head. My breath stopped. It was Chloe, my best friend. For a brief second, I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe they were talking. Maybe I had misunderstood. Then Lucas gently reached for her hand. She smiled. The distance between them disappeared. And before my eyes, they kissed. Not a quick accident. Not a misunderstanding. A slow, intimate kiss that spoke louder than any confession ever could. Time seemed to stop. The music continued playing. The sunlight still filled the room. But everything inside me shattered. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The two people I had trusted more than anyone else had destroyed every promise they had ever made to me. I stood frozen. Neither of them noticed me. For several endless seconds, I simply stared. Then Lucas slowly opened his eyes. His smile vanished instantly. His face turned pale. Sophia. My name escaped his lips like a frightened whisper. Chloe looked toward the doorway. The moment she saw me, every bit of color disappeared from her face. She immediately stood up. Sophia, please. Her voice trembled. I can explain. But there was nothing left to explain. The truth had already spoken for itself. Lucas hurried toward me. It isn't what you think. I looked directly into his eyes. For weeks I had doubted myself. I had blamed stress. I had blamed work. I had blamed my own imagination. Now the truth stood only a few feet away. Silent. Impossible to deny. Chloe began crying. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I heard every word. Yet none of them reached my heart. Apologies couldn't erase betrayal. They couldn't rebuild broken trust. Lucas tried to take another step closer. Instinctively, I stepped back. Don't. My voice surprised even me. It was calm. Cold. Almost emotionless. Neither anger nor tears remained. Only emptiness. The room fell silent. The music still played in the background, but it sounded distant now, like it belonged to someone else's life. I looked at Chloe one final time. "You should leave." She covered her face with trembling hands. Without saying another word, she picked up her bag and walked toward the door. She never looked back. A few seconds later, it was only Lucas and me, standing in the middle of a home that no longer felt like home. The distance between Lucas and me kept growing. Every morning I woke up hoping things would improve, and every night I went to bed with the same heavy feeling in my chest. I missed the man who used to make me laugh over dinner. I missed our long conversations. Most of all, I missed the feeling of being loved. Instead of confronting him, I chose a different path. I believed our relationship deserved one more chance. One evening, while sitting alone after work, an idea came to me. What if we leave everything behind for a weekend? No phones. No work. No distractions. Just the two of us. Maybe all we needed was time together. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became. The next day I found a charming seaside hotel about 2 hours away. It wasn't expensive, but it looked peaceful. The rooms overlooked the ocean, and every review described it as the perfect place to relax. Without telling Lucas, I booked the room. For the first time in weeks, I felt excited. When he came home that evening, I greeted him with a smile. "I have a surprise," I said. He looked tired but curious. "What is it?" "I booked us a weekend by the sea." For a brief moment, his face lit up. "Really?" I nodded. I thought we could spend some time together. Just us. He smiled. "I'd like that." Those four words filled me with hope. For the next several days I planned everything carefully. I packed our bags. I searched for restaurants near the beach. I even imagined us walking along the shoreline at sunset, laughing like we used to. Maybe this trip would remind us why we had fallen in love. Maybe this was exactly what we needed. The morning of our trip finally arrived. I cleaned the apartment, packed the last few things, and wore my favorite dress. Lucas had promised he would finish work early and be home by 4 o'clock. At 3:30, I checked the clock again. Everything was ready. 4 o'clock came. Then 4:30. 5. The apartment remained silent. I picked up my phone several times, then put it back down. Finally, it rang. Lucas. The moment I saw his name on the screen, something inside me already knew. I answered quietly. "I'm so sorry," he began. His voice sounded rushed. "There was a problem at work." I can't leave today. I closed my eyes. What kind of problem? My manager needs everyone to stay. We have to fix something before tomorrow. He paused. We'll go next weekend. I promise. Next weekend. Those words felt painfully familiar. There was always another excuse. Another delay. Another promise. I forced myself to stay calm. It's okay, I whispered. We'll talk later. I ended the call before he could say anything else. The apartment suddenly felt enormous. The suitcase stood beside the door. The hotel confirmation still lay on the table. Everything I had planned collapsed within a single phone call. I sank onto the floor. This time, I didn't hold back the tears. I cried until there were no tears left. Not only because the trip had been cancelled, but because, deep inside, I was beginning to realize that I was the only one still fighting for us. When evening came, I made a decision. I needed space. I needed to clear my mind away from the apartment, away from the silence, away from the endless questions. I called my mother. Can I come home for a few days? She didn't ask why. She simply replied, Of course. We'll be waiting. Hearing those words brought me more comfort than I expected. I packed a small travel bag before going to bed. Lucas returned home long after midnight. I pretended to be asleep. He quietly entered the bedroom, changed his clothes, and lay beside me. We were only inches apart. Yet it felt like we were separated by an entire lifetime. Before sunrise, I slipped out of bed without making a sound. Lucas was still sleeping peacefully. I looked at him one last time. Part of me wanted to wake him, to ask every question that had been haunting me. But another part was simply too tired. Without saying goodbye, I picked up my bag, locked the apartment behind me, and drove toward my parents' house. As the city disappeared in my rearview mirror, I expected to feel only sadness. Instead, alongside the pain, there was something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I didn't know it then. But before this day ended, my life was about to change forever. The apartment was silent. Only a few minutes earlier, it had been filled with music. Now the silence felt unbearable. Lucas stood a few steps away, unable to meet my eyes. His face was pale, and his hands trembled as though he already knew there was nothing left to save. Sophia, please, he whispered. Just let me explain. I looked at him for a long moment. The man standing in front of me looked familiar, yet he felt like a complete stranger. You've already explained enough, I said quietly. I saw everything. He shook his head desperately. It wasn't supposed to happen. I gave a bitter smile. Nothing like this just happens, Lucas. His shoulders dropped. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then the words poured out of him. He admitted that the relationship with Chloe had started only a few weeks earlier. At first, they had convinced themselves it meant nothing. They believed it was just a mistake that would disappear. But instead of ending it, they kept meeting in secret. Every late evening at work. Every hidden phone call. Every excuse. Every lie. Suddenly, every strange moment from the past few months made perfect sense. I remembered the unfamiliar perfume on his shirt. The late-night messages. The secret smiles. The cancelled weekend trip. None of it had been my imagination. I had been trusting two people who were quietly betraying me. Lucas stepped closer again. I know I ruined everything. His voice cracked. I was selfish. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Tears rolled down his face. I still love you. For a moment, I simply stared at him. A few months earlier, hearing those words would have meant everything. Now, they meant nothing. Love without honesty was only another lie. I believed every promise you ever made, I said softly. I defended you when my heart warned me something was wrong. I paused. I even blamed myself. Lucas covered his face with both hands. I'm sorry. So is Chloe. I know sorry isn't enough. No, Ia replied. It isn't. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out the apartment key. I'll leave if you want. I looked around the room. The photographs on the shelf. The couch where we used to watch movies. The kitchen where we had cooked dinner together. Every corner held a memory. But now those memories felt broken. I realized something important. Even if Lucas disappeared forever, this apartment would never feel safe again. The walls had witnessed too many lies. The home I loved no longer existed. I took a slow breath. You don't have to leave. Lucas looked confused. Instead, I walked toward the bedroom. He followed me with frightened eyes as I packed a suitcase. Not many things. Only the belongings that truly mattered. Some clothes. A few family photographs. My journal. The little sketchbook I had almost forgotten. When I returned to the living room, Lucas finally understood. His face filled with panic. No. Sophia, please don't go. I'll do anything. I'll quit my job. I'll never see Chloe again. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right. His voice echoed through the apartment. but my decision had already been made. Trust is fragile. Once it's shattered, it can never return exactly the way it was. I placed my apartment key gently on the table. The small sound of metal touching wood seemed louder than anything either of us had said. "I'm not leaving because I hate you," I said. "I'm leaving because I finally respect myself." Lucas broke down completely. He cried openly, begging me to stay. Months earlier, seeing him cry would have broken my heart. Now, I felt only sadness for what we had become. I picked up my suitcase. Without another word, I walked to the front door. My hand rested on the handle for a second. I took one last look at the apartment. It had once been the happiest place in my life. Now it was only a building filled with memories that no longer belonged to me. I opened the door. As I stepped outside, Lucas called my name one final time. I didn't turn around. Some chapters are too painful to reread. They must simply end. Outside, the cool morning air touched my face. For the first time in months, my future was uncertain. I had no plan. No idea what tomorrow would look like. But one thing was finally clear. I would rather face an unknown future alone than continue living inside a beautiful lie. Leaving that apartment was the hardest decision I had ever made. For the first few days, I stayed with my parents. They never pushed me to talk before I was ready. My mother quietly made my favorite meals, while my father sat beside me every evening, reminding me through his silence that I wasn't alone. Some mornings I woke up feeling angry. Other mornings I felt completely empty. Healing wasn't quick, and it certainly wasn't easy. But little by little, life continued moving forward. A few weeks later, I rented a small apartment of my own. It wasn't large or luxurious. There was only one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a narrow balcony overlooking a quiet street. Yet every corner belonged to me. There were no secrets hidden inside those walls. No lies waiting behind locked phones. Only peace. At first, the apartment looked almost empty. I slept on a simple mattress, ate meals at a folding table, and slowly collected furniture whenever I could afford it. Instead of feeling lonely, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. For the first time in a long while, I was building a life that depended on no one else. Work kept me busy during the day, but evenings were often difficult. To avoid sitting alone with painful memories, I decided to try something completely new. One afternoon, while walking home, I noticed a small art studio. Colorful paintings filled the front window. Without thinking too much, I walked inside. The instructor welcomed me with a warm smile and invited me to join a beginner's class. "I've never painted before," I admitted. She smiled. "That's exactly where every artist begins." Those words stayed with me. The first painting I created was far from perfect. The colors blended in strange ways, and the shapes weren't exactly beautiful. But something incredible happened while I painted. For the first time in months, my mind became quiet. There were no memories of betrayal. No endless questions. Only colors, brushes, and imagination. Week after week, I returned to the studio. Painting slowly became more than a hobby. It became therapy. It gave me a way to express emotions I could never put into words. One evening I met an older woman named Eleanor. She was cheerful, wise, and endlessly encouraging. She admired one of my paintings and asked if we could have tea after class. That simple invitation became the beginning of a genuine friendship. Unlike the friendship I had lost, this one asked for nothing except honesty. We spent hours talking about life, dreams, mistakes, and second chances. Eleanor once told me something I never forgot. Heartbreak doesn't end your story, she said. It simply changes the chapter. Those words changed something inside me. Months passed. Slowly, I smiled more often. I laughed without forcing it. The pain didn't disappear overnight, but it stopped controlling my life. One Saturday, Eleanor convinced me to display a few paintings at a local weekend market. I almost refused. What if nobody likes them? I asked nervously. She laughed. The only way to fail is never to try. So I set up a small table with my artwork. People stopped to look. Some admired the colors. Others asked about the inspiration behind each painting. Before the afternoon ended, someone bought my very first piece. Holding that payment in my hands wasn't important because of the money. It mattered because it proved I had created something meaningful from my pain. Every painting afterward became another step forward. One afternoon, while arranging my artwork at the market, a man stopped in front of my display. He spent several minutes studying one painting without saying a word. Finally, he smiled. "You painted this?" "Yes," I answered. "It's beautiful," he replied. "My name is Julian." "I'm Sophia." After talking for a while, he asked if I'd like to meet for coffee sometime. Months earlier, I would have been terrified to trust another person. Now I simply smiled. "I'd like that." Our first conversation lasted hours. There was no pressure. No pretending. Just two people enjoying each other's company. As I drove home that evening, I realized something. I wasn't searching for someone to complete my life anymore. I had already begun doing that myself. Julian wasn't a rescue. He was simply someone I met after I had learned how to stand on my own. That made all the difference. Sometimes people ask whether I regret everything that happened. The answer surprises them. No, I don't. What Lucas and Chloe did caused unimaginable pain. But their betrayal also forced me to discover a stronger version of myself. I learned that trust should be earned. I learned that real love never asks you to ignore your instincts. Most importantly, I learned that happiness cannot depend entirely on another person. It begins within you. Today my apartment is filled with paintings instead of broken promises. The walls display my own artwork. The windows still welcome the morning sun. But now, when I watch the light enter my home, I don't think about the life I lost. I think about the life I built. A life shaped by courage. A life guided by honesty. A life that finally belongs to me. My story didn't end the day my heart was broken. That was simply the day I began writing a better one.